Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 37. Today's show is with Glenn Carlson, who is from the Key Person of Influence program. And in this chat, he shares his tips on forming partnerships and how that has taken him from $1 million in revenue to $1 million in profit. And he shares a few of his failures, which he's never actually broadcast before. So we're in for a treat. We see the highs and the lows, which is true for all marketers and all entrepreneurs. So here we go.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
Hey guys, it's Adam Franklin from the Web Marketing That Works podcast. This is the show for people who love marketing on the web. You'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments. We look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We confess what's failed and reveal the truth about what really works. This podcast is brought to you by our new book, which is also called Web Marketing That Works, and specifically brought to you by the 33 free marketing templates that go with it. You can get your hands on those at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. And I'd like to give a very big shout out and thank you to Laurie Williams, who left us a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you so much. We appreciate your support. Now let's get into the show. Hello listeners, it's Adam Franklin from the Web Marketing That Works podcast. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Glenn Carlson. How are you, Glenn?
G'day, Adam. I'm well, mate. You?
Really well, thank you.
Great.
Now, Glenn is a successful entrepreneur, speaker, and co-founder of Entrevo. Did I say that right, Glenn?
We call it Entrevo, but it depends on what country you're coming from.
Entrevo. It's an international training company operating in the UK, the USA, and Australia, and best known as the director of the popular 40-week Key Person of Influence Business Growth Accelerator program. Glenn and his team specialize in helping fellow entrepreneurs and business leaders become more valuable, visible, and connected in their industries. And just last week, the Huffington Post stated that Key Person of Influence is the world's leading personal brand accelerator. Glenn is also a guest lecturer at RMIT's School of Management, and his speaking topics revolve around his belief that there has never been a better time to use technology to build a global business and brand around the things you love. I totally agree with that, Glenn, and I recognize you from your smiling face holding court at the Key Person of Influence events, speaking to hundreds and hundreds of people. A very confident and well-polished speaker, in my opinion. So thanks for coming on the show.
Well, mate, thank you very much, and thank you for that very eloquent introduction. It sounds so good I could have written it myself.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Now, I obviously might have missed a few things in that intro. Do you want to fill in a couple of blanks for me in terms of like what you do and your situation at the moment?
Yeah, so I guess essentially we provide training and development programs. We do it specifically for the founders of service-based business owners. And service in particular is very much our niche. So we work with business owners that typically got less than 5 staff, and from architects to accountants, from personal trainers to plumbers. I used to do a lot of work in the tech space. I had a couple of businesses there, sold one of them, and was always excited about the tech incubators in like Silicon Valley or New York, and all the cool, huge businesses that were coming out of those. But I didn't really love tech. I'm a services guy. I love services. I love working with people that are really building a business based on their skills and based on their passions and based on what they love. So I worked with Daniel Priestley, my business partner and the author of the book, Become a Key Person of Influence, and we turned that 5-step methodology that was in that book into a 40-week growth accelerator where we would bring in industry experts, entrepreneurs, people that aren't on the seminar circuit making their money out of speaking, but people that have already achieved a significant amount of success by doing what they do. We connect them with our clients, and over basically 40 weeks, we kick them into shape by focusing on their pitch, focusing on publishing their ideas, focus on developing scalable products, raising their profile, and doing joint ventures and partnerships with other key people in their industry. So we're in 7 cities now around the world. We've got about 20 full-time staff globally, about 10 in Australia. Those staff are in about 7 different countries, so we rock quite a number of different time zones, and have the challenge of kind of managing a global team virtually, which certainly has its upsides, but has its downsides as well. And I guess that kind of sums it up.
That's great. I mean, I've read the Key Person of Influence book. I loved it. I've been to your events. They're brilliant. I've recommended it to our email subscribers, and I'm friends with some of the mentors and graduates of your course too. So I've heard all good things, and my first-hand experience has been really good as well. Now, Glenn, how would you describe your web marketing philosophy?
Well, it's funny. Until you actually asked me this question, and full disclosure to everyone listening, I've got a cheat sheet in front of me where Adam sent me through some hints as to what he was going to be asking me. And I read it, what is your web marketing philosophy? And I'm like, shit, I hadn't really thought of it. I guess the answer to that question would be that my approach to marketing is I try and sell myself. I try and think, what would I buy? If I write a headline and I think it's cheesy, I assume everyone else is going to think it's cheesy. Whereas if I write a headline and I go, shit, yeah, I'd want to read that, or some email copy or an image or something, and it makes me go, oh, I want to engage with that. Then that's kind of what we go with. That's, I guess, my litmus test. So I guess if you could call it a philosophy, it's sell thyself. Which forces, I suppose, authenticity and being real, unless you're very good at bullshitting yourself.
Yeah. Well, I've been on the receiving end of that marketing philosophy from yourself personally and the Key Person of Influence business. And what I've particularly noticed myself with what you guys do is the fact that you do sell yourselves well, but you form the relationships and the networks to really practice what you preach. I mean, one of the first ways I discovered the Key Person of Influence program and the event was through some of your partners who were emailing, me through their list and talking you guys up. And it kept popping up in my inbox. It kept getting mentioned by clients and friends. So that way that you form those partnerships and joint ventures and everything has been something that's really, drawn me to you guys.
Yeah, look, I was being interviewed by Fairfax, who went out in a whole bunch of their publications, the Morning Herald, The Age, that kind of stuff around. They asked me what was the major contributing factor that got us to $1 million in profit in under 3 years. That was what the entire article was about. A bit self-aggrandizing, I appreciate. But this was a year and a half ago or so now, and the answer was partnerships. 95% of all of our business has come through partnerships. It was my startup strategy when I first arrived. Back in Australia, I'd been overseas for about 5 years, so I didn't have any established networks. I didn't have a database. I didn't even have a CMS. Had absolutely nothing. No website, no content management system, no email system, nothing. And to kind of go to sort of 0 to $1 million in the first year, and then go from 0 to $1 million profit in year 3, I'm absolutely convinced it's all about partnerships, which is kind of cool because when we're running a campaign or an event, because of that strategy, people tend to get the messages in different ways from, we've had someone say, I've got 14 emails from different people saying, I've got to go check out your event. And it's like after the 9th one, I'm like, all right, I'm going. Quit it.
And when it comes from 9 different people who you trust, there's got to be something good going on there. So
exactly right. And I think a lot of people, especially that are trying to get into the marketing space or trying to get their head around marketing, they basically end up spamming people because they want to get the message, and they've got a great message often, and so they just keep hitting people with it. But if it's coming from the same source, it loses its power. Whereas if you can hit people with the message from different sources that they already trust, that have more trust than you, because when I first got to Australia, I had no trust in the marketplace. That no one knew what Key Person of Influence was. No one knew who Glenn Carlson was. None of that kind of stuff. And so I had to leverage the trust of others. And so basically it was, how do I get other people to spread our message, which was a good little gambit.
Now, we may have actually answered the next question, which is, what have been your major aha moments in your journey so far?
Yeah, so the major breakthrough that I had, and let me set this frame, right? I'd say that between Dan and myself, we are pretty good marketers, pretty good salespeople. That's our DNA. We built, quite successful businesses on the back of sales and marketing. And my experience is, a business built on the back of sales and marketing is an exhausting treadmill, pain in the ass. Did I mention exhausting treadmill, pain in the ass? And that was kind of what we did for about 7 or 8 years or so. Dan and I started our first company when we were about 21, 2001 or so. And we built it. We did good revenue, right? And I guess that is the thing. Sales and marketing is a very much a cash flow side of the equation, but cash flow on its own isn't enough. After sort of 7 or 8 years, realizing that if we for a second took our foot off the sales and marketing machine, the whole thing stops. There was no asset perpetually driving the value of what we did. We're essentially a brokerage model, and we didn't have all that much value. While we were doing, 3 or 4 million in revenue at the time, we put it up for sale because we were literally buggered, and the most we were offered was a couple of $100,000. Now that was a bit of a slap in the face, considering we felt like, we'd built a pretty good kick-ass business, had a pretty good brand, good reputation, good systems, all this sort of stuff, and yet it held no value. So the answer to your question, and this does relate to marketing, is the major aha moment was this idea that we got from a guy called Darren Sherlaw. He's one of our business coaches that's kind of helped us scale from essentially a little brokerage business to a global asset-driven business. And the distinction was this: income follows assets. Right? Income follows assets. You can think of it from the perspective of a real asset. Most people think of property, right? And if you think of property, and if you had an empty block of land, how would you get income from that? Well, you'd have to build an asset. You'd have to build a house and then rent that house out. And then as a result, you've got the asset first, the income comes from it second. What most people tend to miss is that we live in an age of intellectual property, where intellectual property actually holds more value than plant and machinery, the traditional assets. So, if you look at the balance sheet of companies like Apple or Toyota or even Whole Foods, 60, sometimes 70% of their actual balance sheet is coming from intellectual property, and that becomes the asset. Now, this kind of starts to get a bit fuzzy, right? But you can think about assets in terms of a database of clients, could be an asset, a proprietary system. So we have a system of helping people build influence in their industry. It's a 5-step method. We're known for that. That's intellectual property. That is considered an asset. Contractual agreements could be another asset. A brand could be another asset. Like a book, you guys have just launched your book with great success, right? So that's now an asset. I can imagine, Adam, that there was plenty of conversations that you were having over and over and over and over and over with people. Finally, you've got those conversations written down in a book. So when someone asks the question, you can just give it to them and go, here, read that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what that's created is an asset. Now, I define an asset is something that creates new value, right? But without the creator of the asset having to be involved anymore, right? So now you've written that book, it's an asset, right? It can go out, people can read it, it can create new value, it can attract new clients, but you don't have to do any more writing of that book for it to do that work on your behalf. So bringing it back, when we realized that income follows assets and we hadn't developed an asset for our business. We didn't have at the time, we were all sales and marketing. We didn't have a proprietary system. We didn't have a methodology. We hadn't established any really successful partnerships and things like that. And so the moment that our focus shifted from sales and marketing, a sales and marketing focus, to an asset development focus, the entire game shifted. So by focusing on the 5 Ps that we promote at pitch, publishing thought leadership, creating products and those assets, raising our profile around those products and assets, and doing strategic joint ventures and partnerships, oh man, like the feeling of, I suppose, relief that there is now a really powerful platform underlying the sales and marketing that we're doing, that A, makes the sales and marketing far more effective, B, if we slow down with our sales and marketing, the assets that we've developed continue to generate revenue and income without us having to ride the treadmill so hard. And summing it all up, I guess that was the big breakthrough from us. That allowed us to go from a little brokerage business to a global business in 7 cities now. We've done that in sort of 3.5 years, and it was that one idea.
That's a powerful revelation there, and must be a very liberating feeling having the asset underneath it all and not just being on that treadmill, as you say, which can be a very lonely, hard-working sort of place.
Well, it takes you from a cash flow conversation to a balance sheet conversation, which is a strong balance sheet is a far more comfortable place to be sitting, far more relaxing place to be sitting.
I bet. All right, now part 2 of the podcast, Glenn, is where we look at the marketing experiments and we look at the good, the bad, and potentially the ugly.
Yep, got them all.
Now let's start with the good. What have you tried that's worked well, and can we dive into some specifics?
So what's worked well is partnerships, right? So I'd noted that down. We've potentially gone there a little bit already. But what worked well is exactly what we spoke about before. It's I'll go out if I'm about to launch a campaign for something, and I'll rope in as many partners as I possibly can to promote that thing on our behalf. And so that works well for exactly what we said before, is that people can get hit 6 or 7 times, which is ample for them to kind of go, all right, enough already. Where if I had to just send them 6 emails, it wouldn't have had that same impact. So taking the marketing collateral, the content, the value proposition, all that kind of stuff, and getting other people to share it on to their audiences on our behalf was probably the number one thing that's worked really well for us in a really big way. So you've asked me to talk about specifics as well. So the specifics requires 2 things. A, it requires what we can offer in return. So if someone's listening and they're thinking about a partnership, you can't think of it from the perspective of what are you going to do for me? You've got to think of it from the perspective of what can I do for you? And in my experience in working in the small business space, what everyone's looking for is new business. And so we look for partners that have the same target market as us. So service-based business owners, less than 5 staff, optimistic, aspirational, want to make a bit of a dent in the universe, and reasonably familiar with technology, but not necessarily geeks or geniuses or anything like that. So we find people like that, but we find them without a competitive overlap. So we find people that are doing different things to what we're doing. And so as a result, if one of our clients goes to them, it's no skin off our nose. And if one of their clients comes to us, it's no skin off their nose. And so we find that creates a powerful partnership. And so then what we do is via our events and conferences that we run, we use those to create a platform to be able to promote our partners in return. So basically the simple story is they send us leads and people buy tickets from the emails that they send out to their database, to our conferences, and in return we pitch their business to our audience. Simple reciprocal sort of stuff. Now this is fairly common, I suppose, but because it became a core feature of how we grow our business, I find that was the thing that worked very, very well. So partnerships, finding people, same target market, no competitive overlap, and thinking what can I do for you rather than what you can do for me. Totally.
And actually that got me thinking, because that whole idea of hearing it 5 or 6 times from different trusted sources reminded me of a quote that I always use in my social media presentations, and that is that 90% of people trust recommendations from a friend, but only 14% of people trust advertisements, which I
Yeah.
consider basically anything the company is saying about themselves.
Absolutely, which makes sense because we've got an agenda, and it's a pretty overt agenda. And so, anytime there's an agenda in play, it lends itself to, I suppose, manipulation. Just because of the nature of the game, you're trying to twist the odds in your favour. And whether you're actually doing that or not, that's what everyone's thinking. And so, the moment you're aware that that's what everyone's thinking, how do you get around that particular block in people's receptivity, I suppose, and partnerships are a great way to do it.
Yeah, nice. Now, Glenn, how about the bad? What hasn't worked so well?
So what hasn't worked well is, you see, I'm very clever, very, 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 very clever, and sometimes I like to create very, very clever marketing campaigns, which just don't freaking work. So I got a bit too clever on a few things. One of them most recently is for our previous round of conferences that we ran. Our speakers are pretty awesome, right? They've done great stuff. And what I thought was we'd go out and we'd give our audience, our database, the opportunity to interview at the conference our speakers. So we're going to bring in a camera crew and do all that kind of stuff so people could interview it, so then they could then take that interview back to their database and push it out, and it'd be good value content and all that kind of stuff. And all that they had to do was refer a few people to our conference. Mate, it was just too complicated. There were too many moving parts in it. Not all of them knew who all of the speakers were, all that kind of stuff, and mate, it just didn't land. I put all this effort into it, built all these different landing pages and steps and all that kind of stuff, and it was just too complicated, which goes against one of my fundamental driving principles is Occam's razor: keep it as absolutely simple as possible. If there's a word you can remove and the sentence still sounds or still holds its meaning, remove the word. Remove superlatives, remove all that kind of crap. Keep it simple. So I went against my own advice, got too clever. And mate, it was we scored an absolute donut for that one. No one opted in, which was won't do that again.
That's a learning experience, right? When things don't go the way you planned, you call it experience.
And look, I guess the cool thing is that when you've got a solid base, which I felt like we had, you can experiment, you can test. And it was no real skin off my nose. Like, no one would have really known that didn't succeed until such time as I told everyone on your bloody podcast just now. So the downside wasn't huge. No one knows what the uptake was or anything like that. So it was worth a shot because it could have worked really well. I actually got the idea from Gary Vaynerchuk, who did something similar. Worked really well for him. And potentially there's a threshold that when the person now has that's potentially going to be interviewed has that celebrity appeal. Could tip it across the line. So I don't know, a few different factors there, but the thing I learned was keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the next part I'm going to ask you is where we look at the ugly, and it's confession time for any dead set shockers. But I just wanted to say that you guys run events, and over 500 people turn up to them. I've actually run some events where I've sold 0 tickets. And again, people don't know necessarily that if the uptake's been really bad, because until we talk about it now on the podcast and share these things with people, there's no real downside. I mean, if no one buys a ticket, it was a new city that we were trying to it was the first time we'd run an event in Melbourne, and it was a very specific topic, and it was a LinkedIn masterclass. And it sold well in Brisbane, which is where our business started, and it sold tickets in Sydney as well. But Melbourne was complete donuts for us. But you got to be testing these things to see where the demand is, to see what people actually want. So over to you now, Glenn. You've shared one thing that didn't work. Have you had any absolute dead set shockers, either in this business or in previous businesses?
Mate, the dead set shocker that I wrote down, and no, I mean we've never had an event that we haven't really filled to the point where I was embarrassed to be there. I mean, and that's always my gnawing fear. My gnawing fear is far out. What if no one shows up?
And that's what stops a lot of people running events because of that.
Yeah, it's a freaking nightmare.
Oh, it's terrifying, isn't it?
If you're thinking about running an event, my one piece of advice: don't. What was I going to say? Advertising, mate. Basically, paying for advertising. does not freaking work. And every time I try at one point, not with this business, but with the prior business, pre-2006, we were spending about $250,000 a month on ads, on advertising, and it was working a treat. And literally around 2005, 2006, it absolutely just dropped off a cliff. And this was before things like Eventbrite or Infusionsoft or any of that kind of stuff. So we custom built our own affiliate marketing system and tracking codes and back-end portal, and we immediately shifted to a partnership-driven model. But every now and again now I still try advertising, and I still try, for the big publications out there that have got all this reach and all these eyeballs and all these media kits and all this fancy pants stuff. And, every now and again I'll throw, 5 or 10 grand or something, and the results are always abysmal. And so I just haven't been able to crack the code on that. And I'd call every time I give it a go, it doesn't land.
Yeah, fair enough. Whilst that doesn't please me that it wasn't successful for you, it does actually ring true with a lot of the stuff that Toby and I talk about in our book, and that is the fact that you really need to be building a web marketing asset, which is something that you own and that appreciates in value, as opposed to having to actually pay for advertising. Because as soon as that ad, whether it's hard copy or online, if it's online and somebody clicks a pay-per-click link, once you've clicked, if you want more traffic, you've got to reach into your pocket again and pay more money. And once your ads appeared in, say, a magazine, once it's fish and chip wrapper the next day, so then you've got to, if you want those eyeballs again, you've actually got to pay money. And there's no guarantee that it's even going to convert or lead to any business. So it's a very risky game. It's a very short-term game, and it depreciates so quickly when you could be allocating that money and that resources into building blog content or YouTube content or podcast content and have this whole nurturing process, because all the stuff you create online, if it's a web marketing asset, it means it's going to be here next week and next month and next year, and you just build more and more of that. So it's interesting that your experiences marries up to our experience too.
Yeah, very much. And look, I think anyone listening that's been through the same journey and actually thrown some money at it, and this is the thing, it's good copy. Like, we know the copy that would work on an email, tweet, same value proposition, same everything, just does not fly in the advertising space. But I think, Adam, the word is accountability. Often people try and remove themselves from being accountable to grow their own business by simply paying other people to do it for them. So, I'll pay Fairfax to grow my business for me, and they'll put ads in and the business will show up. Every now and again you get bubbles where that kind of deferral of accountability can work, but it is short term, as opposed to, exactly as you said, building the assets of value. So an asset has value, it creates value without you having to do it. So this podcast, once it's done and up, becomes an asset. Someone might listen to it in 3 years' time and go, shit, I really want to work with Adam. He sounds like a dude. These guys obviously know what they're doing. So that asset is built. And so if you're listening to this, you want to think about an easy way to start thinking about an asset, right? Is thinking about it from the perspective of, imagine a square piece of paper with a line down the middle and a line and through the middle. So it creates 4 squares. And think of each of the squares is watch, listen, read, do. Right? So if you create something that someone can watch, like a YouTube video, boom, once it's up and posted, that actually becomes an asset, right? It can be reused without you having to do anything. It can add value to the person using it or watching it without you having to do anything. And it can drive traffic and engagement without you having to do anything. So that kind of defines this asset. So watch, listen, right? So this is a podcast. So this would fit into the listen category. Read, so whether it's a blog, whether it's a book, but it's something that once it's done, and then do. So an activity of some sort. It might be a diagnostic test. So for example, you can go to keypersonsofinfluence.com/test. And we've developed 40 questions to be able to help people diagnose their influence so they can work out in what areas they're strong on each of the 5 Ps, pitch, publish, product, profile, partnerships, where they're weak, and it'll customize suggestions as to the areas that they can focus on. So that's something that they can do. And that's an asset, just sits there, clicks along. We get about, it's not a lot because we put absolutely no energy into driving it, we get about 20 or 25 new leads a day, just ticking along through that come through, that build the database slowly. And that's just one of many kind of value-based lead generating assets that we have out there in the ecosystem. And as soon as we focused on the idea that income follows assets, you put an ad in a newspaper, that is not an asset. That is a clear expense. Whereas you build a test, you write a blog, you create a video, you do a podcast, you're now building assets. And every single time, if you do it well, income follows assets. Hence, it all kind of ties itself together in this marketing mix.
I love that income follows assets idea. What would your advice be to somebody starting out from scratch if they had no marketing asset? What would you be advising them to do first, or what would you do first?
Create one. Literally create one. Now, you create a brochure, that can be almost as good as an asset, right? So you don't necessarily need to have the product to sell before you promote it. So when I first launched in Australia, I had the speakers lined up, and I had their agreements to speak. I had the venue on, first right of refusal booking and all that kind of stuff, but nothing had been delivered yet, and yet I'm selling the hell out of it. So first thing to realize is that if you're just starting out, don't put too much focus on the development of the product. Put your focus into the development of the value proposition of the product, because then the market will tell you whether or not it likes the idea of your product and whether it's going to put its money where its mouth is. And then when it does, you can then go and develop the product. I mean, the way Branson launched Virgin Australia was, do you remember, go back in time, do you remember when flights from like Brisbane to Sydney used to cost sort of $400? When it was just Qantas, Ansett, that kind of stuff? And then Virgin came in and they were pre-selling tickets 9 months out for $99. Do you remember that campaign?
Yeah.
Right? So everyone freaking bought tickets. They put something like $60 million in the bank account. And then you know what Branson went and did?
Spent the $60 million on an airline.
He went and bought planes.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't own a freaking plane when they were selling the tickets. Obviously, they knew they could go and buy planes. Obviously, they knew that they could get it at the airport. So they had all the ducks in the row, but they hadn't actually spent the cash until they sold it. So I see so many people making the mistake of putting all their money into product development and then having no energy or cash left to actually promote and sell the thing. So I always focus on spearheading and promoting and selling it first. And then that'll give you the resources you need to back it up and deliver the product. That's coming from startup. You're asking me about startup. That's kind of what I do. So I do that, step one. Step two is do partnerships, right? So then once you've created that idea, that product has value, who would then benefit from your success? And then turn them into a partner and get them to help you promote this idea of a product that you've got. And those two things combined, I think, would be my bits of advice for someone starting up, or if I was to go back. That's how I started in Australia. I sold it before I delivered it, and I created partners to help me sell the idea of what I was yet to deliver.
And what's next on the marketing front for you then with KPI, Glenn?
Mate, we've just, a couple of weeks ago, we just launched our latest campaign for our upcoming series of brand accelerators. This was the thing that the Huffington Post referenced when it said, we'd become the leading personal brand accelerator. We see that there are three types of brands. There's your company's brand, there's your product's brand, and then there's your personal brand. And we find that as the founder of a business, your personal brand carries so much more weight and influence in your industry to be able to help you develop your company's brand and therefore revenue, and your product's brand and therefore reach. So we run a one-day conference where we bring together our mentors that work with our clients over the 40 weeks. So industry-leading entrepreneurs, we bring them in from a day, and we also bring in our clients that have been applying this stuff at a very tactical, practical level. And we basically just let fly for the day, and we share as much of the best thinking, of the best practices in terms of what's working and what's not working right now, I guess. And so we're mid-campaign for those series of events coming up in late July in Sydney, on the 26th of July in Sydney, and then mid-August in Melbourne, and then early September in Brisbane.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put details for all of those events on the show notes, and
Groovy.
I'll no doubt be in attendance at least one of those.
Love to have you, mate, as always.
Cool. Now, part 3 of the podcast, Glenn, is where we dive deep into one specific area. And my question for you is, which specific marketing tactic brings you the most joy?
So tactic, joy. I saw this question and I thought about it. That joy, fun. The thing I have the most fun with is when I just ask questions of our database, right? So, for example, for the launch of this campaign, I was lamenting to my graphic designer. We were talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and I was lamenting that I love business. I'm a business geek. I love doing all this kind of cool stuff, but I also love the fantasy kind of I have in my head of the lifestyle of some of these awesome Hollywood directors, right? That I love what they do, create these amazing movies, but they're in Hollywood, so there's the celebrity and there's all that kind of fun stuff that goes around it. So I'm talking to my designer about that, and then he goes and he creates this freaking poster for our brand accelerator that's in the image of a movie poster or the cover of a DVD or something like that. Fully stylized, even with the little wreaths of like the Cannes Film Festival talking about a few quotes and from the producers of Key Person of Influence. And I wet myself. I thought it was the funniest thing. And so we pushed it out to the database as a bit of a laugh and just sort of said, what do you think? And I actually really enjoy doing that kind of stuff, taking a bit of the mickey out of ourselves, not taking ourselves too seriously, and just seeing who wants to engage with that. And I must have had, I don't know, hundreds of personal emails coming back, which I replied to every single one, letting me know their thoughts. Overwhelmingly, people loved it. They thought it was funny. It was all a bit with tongue in cheek. But it was also one of the most successful launches of a campaign we'd ever had. So it created a bit of controversy because it was just meant to be a fun little movie poster. It didn't have a brand, any of our logos on it. It didn't have a call to action. It had none of that stuff, right? And so we all had a whole bunch of marketing experts telling us how, what was wrong with it. And so it created a bit of controversy. And then we had people saying it was a bit of fun. And then we had people saying it was all designed wrong and the layers were wrong and all this kind of stuff. And then we had people saying they thought it was really good and it's catchy and they forwarded it to heaps of people. So it sparked like opinions from all angles with a simple question of what do you think? And it sold more tickets than any other kind of campaign that we've launched with. So that was fun.
That's really cool. And I guess it humanizes you and shows a bit of personality or a lot of personality. And I love how by putting that out to your readership and asking that simple question, what do you think? Getting those 100+ email conversations going is a really powerful way to get your that relationship stronger and that element of trust, because I guess you're being a little bit vulnerable by putting something a little bit silly out there. Obviously, some people are going to tell you what you're doing wrong, but a lot of other people are going to go, wow, this guy's a bit of fun. He's putting himself out there and you're interacting with people.
You'll have to stick it on the link so people can see what the hell we're talking about. Any sense?
I'll pop that in.
But I know the layers are all wrong, or I think they are. I don't know. It's funny. It's actually another great point, right? I had 50% of people saying it was great, and I had 50% of people pulling it to bits. And I think this is the lesson to go away with, is that opinions are like armpits. Everyone's got two, and they usually stink. Right? so trust your gut, right? Go if you're looking at creating a marketing piece, come back to, would you read on after the headline, right? Would you read on after the first paragraph? Would you click the frickin' link, or whatever it is that you're creating? Would it engage you? And would it bring a smile to your face? Would it create some kind of an emotional reaction or engagement? Does it touch into some kind of pain that you've experienced in the past that you're trying to help solve for other people? And is it relevant, I suppose? And if so, don't ask anyone else's freaking opinion. Go with it, because everyone has a different opinion, and they will you ask enough people, you'll get enough feedback to make it absolutely certain that every single thing you do is wrong. So I'd say ignore those people, do what feels right for you, and then test it on the stone of the market. You sharpen your pitch, you sharpen your marketing, you sharpen your message on the stone of the market, trust yourself, and then listen to the market and iterate would be my main tip, I suppose.
Cool. Now, we're talking obviously email marketing there. You're actually emailing your subscribers. Is that you writing all the emails each week? Is it somebody else? Is it your team? Or can you take us through your email marketing?
Well, it depends. It's probably 60% of it is me. Mm-hmm. I do have my team, or if we're working with partners, they'll often send something through. So, for example, you guys sent me through some pre-written stuff for your book. Yep. Which I probably changed about 30% of that just to bring my own twist to it. Yep. So it was definitely coming from my voice. So we don't send anything to our database without it being approved by me. And there's usually a tweak there. I try and be a bit irreverent. I try and call it how it is. I try and have this mix of sort of the New York vibe of no bullshit. Boom, here's how it is. It's simple, it's clear, and it's concise. Do something. Or not, but I'm giving you the choice there. So no, it all pretty much comes from my desk. But I love working with a piece that's kind of been crafted to the 60%. It's got the functional guts in it, and then I can kind of just tweak it.
Nice. Now, Glenn, you strike me as somebody who reads a lot, learns a lot from others. Who have you learnt from, either in person or via their books and blogs or presentations? Like, who are some good mentors we can be following?
Oh, look, no one that... Okay, one was a killer, right, about framing and positioning yourself, taking the idea of sales, which is marketing, to a new level, is a guy called Oren Klaff. Wrote a book called Pitch Anything. That was a book I've read recently that it's interesting. It's one of those books where when I read it, and it's like, holy shit, yes, I've been doing all of that stuff for 5 years now. That's the stuff that's been really working for us, but I never had labels or terms for it. Now I have labels and terms for it all. I can measure it more effectively and implement it more effectively. It took it from an intuition, an intuitive thing, to actually now I've got a framework behind it. So that was pretty killer. That was a great book, Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff. But a mate of mine, James Tuckerman, runs Anthill. He's a freaking ninja when it comes to a lot of this kind of online growth hacking kind of stuff. And he gave me one tip, which we recently implemented, which was, this sounds just so simple for anyone that knows what the hell they're doing, but once someone would buy a ticket to our event, we didn't have anything other than a thank you, right? And James said, you're missing out. And so he said, you've got to offer them, once they've bought something, you've got to offer them something afterwards. It's like the most valuable page is the page after the success page, after the success page, whatever. So I went, all right. And so what we did is we built a little widget whereby once you've bought a ticket to our event, which you should go and do right now, so then you can see how this widget works, we give you the opportunity to go and download a free copy of Dan's audiobook, right? So it's the audio version of Become a Key Person of Influence. You can get that sucker for free if you share something online. So via Twitter, via LinkedIn, or via Facebook. And we've got some images and copy and stuff. We have now a 90% share rate. So when someone buys a ticket, 90%, 9 out of 10 people will go, hell yeah, I'll share something on my Facebook wall or Twitter stream or LinkedIn thingamajabjit. And that's huge. So that just massively accelerates the buzz in terms of what we're doing. And, for a simple follow-on page, that was huge. So shout out to Tuckerman for that kind of insight. He did it as well for some stuff he was doing on Anthill and got like an 800% increase in his conversion for a second product. So, I get a combination of my stuff from books, but also just from hanging out with clever people.
Cool. And to close, Glenn, have you got any final parting thoughts or pieces of advice that you'd like to get off your chest and share with our listeners?
No, maybe I'll just highlight a few of the things that we've covered that made a difference to me. The first thing was I try and sell myself and be real. So when I say sell myself, like convince myself, not selling myself, literally. The second thing was this idea of income follows assets, and that sales and marketing is very much a cash flow activity, whereas the stuff that you and I have been talking about, building those assets, is very much a balance sheet activity. And the sales and marketing, again, is very much like the treadmill. That on its own will eventually become exhausting. Think of it like a starter motor, or even a turbo charger for what you've currently got. But you've got to have those assets behind you to create that lasting and ongoing value. And if you were to start out, I'd absolutely start with your pitch. Start with selling it before you've delivered it, and start with key partnerships. That would probably be it.
Brilliant. Now, finally, how can listeners connect with you, Glenn?
I'm imagining if they're listening to this, you'll be able to find something close by with a link or whatever. Otherwise, you can just go to keypersonofinfluence.com.au. That'll take you to our website that promotes our upcoming events. If you want to get hold of me personally, you can send me an email to glen@keypersonofinfluence.com.au. But I'm going to give Adam a link where, because he's a partner of ours, we'll give anyone that wants to a 40% discount on a ticket to the upcoming Brand Accelerator conference. If something goes wrong with that link, just send me an email, and I'll get you a discounted ticket sorted.
Very good. Well, thank you for that, Glenn. And listeners, if you do come along to the KPI event, which I highly recommend, you may see me there. You'll definitely see Glenn's smiling face up on stage, teaching you all these nuggets of wisdom along with 5 other mentors.
I'll only be smiling if there's a lot of people there, mate.
Oh, there's always lots of people at your events, Glenn. I'm confident of that. As well as 5 great mentors. So I do definitely recommend it. I've been myself. I'll be going again. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us.
Rock and roll. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.